Keith Palmer, you'll remember, was the police officer killed on the day of the Westminster Bridge attack. He was unarmed. He was stabbed to death. The Prime Minister said Keith Palmer was every inch a hero. She described him as a wonderful dad and husband. Well, as today's Times reports, some members of Keith Palmer's family feel let down. They want to question what happened to him, but can't get legal aid. The Times reports they've accused Scotland Yard of blocking their pursuit of truth at his inquest, claiming that they've been made to feel worth less than the terrorist who murdered him. Angela Clark and Michelle Palmer, they're Keith's sisters, said they were told that they were part of the policing family after a pomp and ceremony funeral following the attack, but claimed they'd faced hostility from the Met at the inquests. Well, Joseph Kotrie-Monson can help us here, Director of Monson Solicitors. Why would people in these circumstances be declined legal aid?
Good afternoon,
Hi.
Eddie, and that's a very good question. I think the story of Keith Palmer's family's fight for legal aid is sadly an all too common story among practitioners and those of experience of the legal system, and similarly sadly and perhaps infuriatingly symptomatic of the unacceptable decline of legal aid in the list of priorities for our policymakers, and that's where this is coming from. Here we have grieving lay people expected to go through the ordeal of proceedings without advice, and the rationale behind this, and of course there's always black and white justifying these callous decisions and policies, is this: the coroner's proceedings are not adversarial. So it's not one side fighting the other, we are told, like child custody proceedings. Difficult to get that in legal aid for that even at the moment, Eddie, or a criminal trial, similar problems there. But these are fact-finding hearings in which coroners will assist families to go through the proceedings, and they won't be necessarily fighting against anybody or trying to have points proved or explored against other parties. But of course the family in the Keith Palmer case absolutely want answers, not necessarily as to the cause of death, which might ordinarily provide them with legal aid under the exceptional funding, so-called exceptional funding categories. But, for example, in relation to whether there might have been a possibility, had there been armed police, that their beloved relative was saved. Of course, looking at things in this, it's not adversarial. This is an inquisitorial, this is a fact-finding, we're all very friendly and the coroner will help everybody. That type of simplistic attitude, Eddie, like with many other of these legal aid policies, that are just masquerades for government cruelness or cruelty.
They've hired legal people pro bono. Is there any way legally at this stage that this particular family could get legal aid or some other kind of financial help that would help them?
Well, it's funny you should say that, and perhaps you know the answer, but there are special provisions at government level that ministers can step in and provide in exceptional circumstances legal aid. You know, the reality is they shouldn't be having to do so. The reason that we're talking about this is this was a notorious event that captured the public's imagination because of PC Palmer's heroism. There are many, many cases such as this. Reform is trundling along. In June and July there have been movements by the government to widen legal aid for these, but the government's total cruel attitude to legal aid, that comes to a head with cases like Charlie Gard, family denied legal aid, and this family denied legal aid. You know, this must end at root and branch level, not just paying attention to headlines and then trying to move on and forget about the major problem.
Who should we call to get this changed in government? Who's got that power?
Well, I think the first person to speak to you is your MP. The reason that legal aid has been an easy target every time there are budget cuts, and legal aid had many cuts before these austerity cuts and then more cuts again, is because nobody thinks it'll ever happen to them. Thank God we don't think that a member of our family might die violently, or our nephew be accused of rape, or somebody in the family be subject to a messy divorce where childcare is an issue. But of course the reality is these things do happen. You don't think it's going to happen to you, but voters, the electorate, people should be asking, demand of their MPs, that if something like this does happen to them, that the safety net is available. You know, we have to be aware of the fact that it could be us next.
Thank you. Joseph Kotrie-Monson, Director of Monson Solicitors.